I never imagined that my life would unravel so quickly, so violently, all because of a simple curiosity, a curiosity that has now become my curse. It all began when I transferred to this old university, an institution steeped in history and shrouded in secrets. From the moment I stepped onto the cobblestone paths, I felt it, an oppressive weight in the air, like the campus itself was watching, waiting for something. The buildings loomed over me with their weathered facades and towering spires, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch out to pull me into their cold embrace. At first, I dismissed the feeling as mere nerves, the result of being in a new place, far from anything familiar. But the unease only grew stronger, gnawing at the edges of my sanity like a relentless parasite. My first few days were uneventful, a blur of lectures and introductions, but that sense of something being off never left me. It lingered like a bad smell, clinging to my every thought. The nights were the worst. The dorm room they assigned me was small and dimly lit, with ancient, creaking floors that seemed to groan under the weight of something unseen. At night, as I lay in bed, I could hear faint sounds, scratching noises, like nails on wood, and a distant, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the walls. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the old building settling, but the sounds became impossible to ignore. It was as if the very walls were alive, breathing in time with the shadows that crept across the room. One evening, I found myself drawn to the older part of the university, a section of the campus that the students whispered about but rarely visited. The buildings here were older, their stone walls cracked and weathered, covered in thick, dark ivy that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. As I wandered through the narrow, twisting corridors, I felt that oppressive weight grow heavier, pressing down on my chest, like an invisible hand. The air was thick and cold, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid and metallic, like the smell of blood. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something or someone was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Then I found it. At the end of a long, dimly lit hallway, a door. It was different from the others, older, with deep scratches carved into the wood, as if something had tried to claw its way out or in. The door was slightly ajar, and from the darkness beyond, I could feel a cold breeze that sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but something compelled me to push the door open. As I did, the hinges creaked loudly, the sound echoing down the empty hallway like a scream. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from a single, flickering candle on a dusty, wooden table. The walls were lined with shelves, each one crammed full of ancient, leather-bound books that looked like they hadn't been touched in centuries. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decaying paper. But what caught my eye was a large, ornately carved book lying open on the table. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, none of which I could understand. I felt a strange pull, an inexplicable urge to reach out and touch the book, to turn the pages and uncover its secrets. But as I approached, I heard it, a low guttural whisper, coming from the darkness behind me. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat, but there was nothing there, only shadows. Yet the whisper persisted, growing louder, more insistent, as if something was speaking directly into my mind. My head began to pound, a sharp pain shooting through my temples, as the whispering voices merged into one, repeating the same word over and over. Read. The sound was maddening, a chorus of disembodied voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed away, my heart racing, but the room seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing darker, more oppressive. The whispering became a roar, filling my ears, drowning out my thoughts. I could feel my sanity slipping away, like sand through my fingers, as the weight of the unseen presence bore down on me. In a desperate attempt to escape, I slammed the door shut behind me and fled down the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty halls like the beating of a drum. But even as I ran, I knew that whatever I had awakened was far from finished with me. The terror had only just begun. The days following my discovery of the hidden room were a blur of confusion and dread. I tried to forget what I had seen, to bury the memories of that cursed place deep within my mind. But the more I tried to push it away, the more it consumed me. It was as if the library had left a mark on my soul, a stain that I could not scrub away. I found myself drawn back to the old part of the university, retracing my steps, searching for the door I swore I would never open again. But no matter how hard I looked, the door was gone, as if it had never existed. Strange things began happening, small, almost imperceptible at first, but they quickly escalated. It started with the books in my room. I would leave them on my desk, neatly stacked, but when I returned, they would be scattered across the floor, pages torn, and spines bent as if someone, or something, had rifled through them with reckless abandon. I asked my roommate if he had been in the room, but he denied it, his expression filled with concern as he noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the trembling in my hands. I tried to laugh it off, to make a joke of it, but the unease in my stomach only grew. Then came the voices. At first, they were just whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that I could easily dismiss as the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. But soon, they became more distinct, more insistent. I would hear them in the dead of night, when the campus was silent and still, whispering my name from the darkest corners of my room, from behind the closet door, from under the bed. The voices were low and guttural, filled with an ancient malice that sent shivers down my spine. I would sit up in bed, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, but whenever I turned on the light, the room was empty. The voices would stop, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. But their echo lingered in my mind, driving me closer to the edge of sanity. The dreams were the worst. They started as vague, unsettling images, flashes of dark corridors, shadowy figures in ancient, rotting books. But soon, the dreams became more vivid, more real. I would find myself back in that hidden room, the air thick with the smell of decay and something far worse, something that smelled like burning flesh. The book on the table would be open again, its pages filled with those same incomprehensible symbols. But now they seemed to move, to writhe on the page like living things. I would hear the whispers again, louder and more urgent, compelling me to read, to understand, to give in to the madness. When I woke, drenched in sweat, the terror from the dream would cling to me like a second skin, refusing to let go. I began to lose track of time, of what was real and what was not. My classes became a haze of forgotten lectures and missed assignments. My once sharp mind now dull and fogged. I started seeing things. Shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. Dark shapes that moved in the corners of my vision but disappeared the moment I turned to face them. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake, to let my guard down. It was during one of these moments, when I was sitting alone in the library, that I noticed something strange. A book, one I had never seen before, was lying open on the table in front of me. I hadn't brought it with me, hadn't even seen it in the library's collection, but there it was, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The cover was unmarked, the title nowhere to be found. As I stared at the book, I felt that same pull, that same compulsion to read, to delve into whatever dark secrets it held. My hands trembled as I reached for it, but before I could touch the pages, a cold, icy draft swept through the room, snuffing out the candles that lit the dark corners of the library. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as the room plunged into darkness. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. And then from the shadows, I heard it. The whispering, louder than before, more insistent. The voices seemed to come from every direction, surrounding me, filling my ears with their malicious intent. My heart raced as I fumbled for the light, but the darkness was too thick, too complete. I could feel the presence of something in the room with me, something ancient and evil, something that wanted me to open the book, to give in to the madness. In a panic, I pushed the book away, stumbling to my feet as I tried to escape the library. But the door wouldn't open, no matter how hard I pulled or how much I struggled. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, as if it was inside my head, pulling at the edges of my sanity, threatening to tear my mind apart. Just when I thought I would be lost forever, the door suddenly gave way, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. As I fled down the corridor, I could still hear the whispering, following me, echoing in my mind. I knew then that I couldn't escape it, that whatever dark force I had awakened was now a part of me, a shadow that would follow me wherever I went. And no matter how far I ran, how hard I tried to forget, the mystery of that hidden room and the cursed book would haunt me for the rest of my days. The terror had woven itself into the fabric of my reality, and there was no escaping the darkness that now lurked within my soul. The days turned into a blur, each one blending into the next as the darkness inside me grew stronger. It wasn't just the dreams or the whispers anymore. It was something far more sinister, something that I could feel deep within my bones. The air around me seemed thicker, colder, as if the very atmosphere had turned against me. My once vibrant campus was now a labyrinth of shadows, every corner hiding something malevolent, something waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I began to question everything. My surroundings, the people I knew, even my own thoughts. Nothing felt real anymore, and the more I tried to hold on to reality, the more it slipped through my fingers like sand. Isolation became my refuge, though it offered no real safety. I stopped attending classes, stopped seeing friends. Every time I looked into someone's eyes, I saw suspicion, or worse, pity. It was as if they knew, as if they could see the madness creeping up on me, inch by inch. But I couldn't trust them. I couldn't trust anyone. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their whispers behind my back, as if they were all in on some terrible secret that only I was left out of. Paranoia took hold of me, its icy fingers gripping my heart with relentless force, until even the most mundane of interactions felt like a carefully orchestrated lie. The things I saw became more vivid, more real, until I could no longer tell if they were hallucinations or something else. Something worse. Shadowy figures would appear in the periphery of my vision, just for a split second, but long enough to send a jolt of terror through me. They seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as if they were part of some other reality, one that was slowly merging with my own. At night, I would hear footsteps echoing in the halls outside my room, slow and deliberate, as if something was stalking me, waiting for the right moment to make its move. The darkness in my room became oppressive, almost tangible, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. One night, as I sat alone in my room, surrounded by the silence that had become my only companion, I noticed something out of place. A small old key lying on my desk. I hadn't seen it before, hadn't put it there, yet it felt strangely familiar, like a fragment of a half-remembered dream. I picked it up, feeling its cold metal against my skin, and in that moment, I knew it was meant to unlock something I wasn't sure I wanted to find. The key was small, intricate, with strange symbols etched into its surface. They looked like the symbols from the book I had found in the hidden library, and the sight of them filled me with a sense of dread so intense that I nearly dropped the key, but the compulsion to use it was too strong to resist. I knew, deep down, that this key would lead me to answers, but I also knew that those answers would come at a terrible cost. I found myself wandering the campus again, the key clenched tightly in my hand, as if it were the only thing tethering me to reality. The campus was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of student life replaced by an unsettling silence. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, shifting and swirling like living things. They reached out towards me, like hands grasping in the darkness. But every time I turned to look, they were gone, leaving only the suffocating silence behind. Eventually, my steps led me back to that same old corridor, the one where I had found the hidden library. But this time, the door was different. It was no longer old and worn. It was polished and pristine, as if it had just been placed there. My hand trembled as I reached out, the key heavy in my palm. The door swung open easily, revealing a room that was both familiar and strange. It was the same library, but now it was bathed in an eerie, unnatural light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air was thick with the smell of old books, dust, and something else. A smell that made my stomach turn and my skin crawl. It was the smell of decay, of something long dead but not yet gone. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in. The shadows in the room seemed to converge, gathering around me like a living entity, watching, waiting. I tried to focus, to calm my racing heart, but the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. They spoke of things I could not understand, secrets hidden in the dark corners of the mind, truths that were never meant to be known. And with each whisper, I felt a piece of myself slipping away, as if the darkness was consuming me, bit by bit. I found myself drawn to a particular shelf, one that had not been there before. On it were books, dozens of them, all bound in the same dark leather, with no titles or markings. They seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the closer I got, the more I could feel the darkness within them calling to me. My hands shook as I reached out, and as my fingers brushed the spine of one of the books, a cold shock ran through me, as if I had been struck by lightning. My vision blurred, and the room around me twisting and warping, and in that moment, I knew. These books were the source of the darkness, the key to everything that had been happening to me. But as I stood there, my hand hovering over the book, I realized that I was not alone. The shadows around me began to move, coalescing into a shape. A tall, dark figure, its face hidden in the depths of its hood. It watched me with eyes that were nothing more than empty voids. And when it spoke, its voice was a low, guttural whisper, echoing in the deepest recesses of my mind. "You sought the truth," it said, "and now you will find it." The words were not a threat, but a promise, one that chilled me to the core. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and the overwhelming sense that this was something I could not avoid. The figure reached out, its hand nothing more than a shadow, and placed it over mine, forcing me to open the book. As the pages turned, the whispers grew louder, the symbols on the page shifting and writhing as if alive. My mind screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop reading, couldn't tear my eyes away from the horrors that unfolded before me. And in that moment, I understood. The darkness was not just within the books, not just within the shadows that had haunted me. It was within me. It had been all along, growing stronger with each passing day, feeding on my fear, my paranoia, my isolation. The figure was not an external force, but a reflection of my own soul, twisted and corrupted by the forbidden knowledge I had sought. I had opened a door that could never be closed, and now there was no turning back. As the final piece of my sanity slipped away, I realized the truth. The darkness was me, and I was the darkness. We were one and the same, bound together by the secrets I had uncovered, the horrors I had unleashed. And as the shadows closed in around me, I knew that there was no escape, no salvation. The darkness had claimed me, and there was nothing left but the void. As the days turned into nights, and the nights stretched into endless hours of darkness, I found myself slipping further into a chasm from which there seemed no escape. The line between reality and nightmare blurred until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Every moment was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, a fear so deep that it seemed to seep into my very bones. I became a prisoner in my own mind, trapped in a spiral of terror that wound tighter and tighter with each passing hour. The shadows in my room, once mere figments of my imagination, began to take on shapes, vague, twisted forms that lurked in the corners, just out of reach. They whispered to me in the dead of night, their voices like a chorus of the damned, filling my head with thoughts that were not my own. "You're not alone," they would murmur, their voices cold and mocking. were always here, watching, waiting. The more I tried to shut them out, the louder they became until it was impossible to drown them out. Sleep, when it came, was fleeting and filled with nightmares that left me waking in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, as if it were trying to escape. But it wasn't just the shadows. The world around me had changed. Or perhaps it was I who had changed. The once familiar campus now felt like a foreign land, a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. Buildings seemed to shift and warp as I walked by, their windows like dark, empty eyes staring down at me. Hallways that I had traversed countless times now twisted into impossible angles, leading me in circles until I was hopelessly lost. Even the people I knew, the friends I had once trusted, seemed to transform before my eyes. Their faces would flicker, just for a moment, revealing something monstrous beneath. A glimpse of something inhuman, something that should not exist. And then, just as quickly, they would be normal again, leaving me to question whether I had truly seen it or if my mind was playing tricks on me. The whispers followed me everywhere, their voices growing louder, more insistent. They urged me to return to the hidden library, to delve deeper into the forbidden knowledge that had started this nightmare. But I resisted, knowing that whatever answers lay there were not worth the price I would have to pay. Still, the pull was undeniable, a force that tugged at me with increasing strength, as if the darkness itself was calling me home. And with each passing day, my resistance grew weaker, eroded by the relentless tide of fear that consumed me. The hallucinations became more frequent, more vivid, until they were indistinguishable from reality. I would see things, terrible, impossible things, that no one else could see, faces in the mirrors that weren't my own, staring back at me with hollow eyes, shadows that moved on their own, creeping closer and closer, until I could feel their cold breath on the back of my neck. The walls of my room would close in on me, the ceiling pressing down as if trying to crush me beneath its weight. And then, just as suddenly, everything would return to normal, leaving me gasping for breath, my heart racing as I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. But the worst part was the feeling that something was always behind me, just out of sight. No matter where I went, no matter how fast I turned around, I could never catch a glimpse of it. But I could feel it there, lurking in the shadows, watching me with malevolent intent. It was always there, a constant presence that filled me with a cold, paralyzing fear. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close my eyes because I knew that as soon as I did, it would be there, waiting to drag me into the darkness. One night, I finally reached my breaking point. The shadows were thicker than ever, the whispers louder, their voices a cacophony of madness that threatened to tear my mind apart. I could feel the darkness closing in on me, wrapping around me like a shroud, suffocating me with its cold, clammy touch. Desperate, I stumbled out of my room and into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. But even out there, under the pale light of the moon, the shadows followed me. They clung to me, whispering their dark secrets into my ear, filling my head with thoughts of despair and hopelessness. I found myself standing in front of the hidden library, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the key. I didn't know how I had gotten there, didn't remember walking through the campus, but it didn't matter. The door opened with a creak, revealing the same dark room, same ancient books, and the same overwhelming sense of dread. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, the stench of something long dead and forgotten. The shadows moved as if alive, swirling around me, guiding me toward the table in the center of the room where the book lay waiting. My hands trembled as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold leather cover. The moment I touched it, a shock of cold ran through me, freezing my blood in my veins. The whispers grew louder, their voices filled with triumph as I opened the book, the pages flipping on their own, revealing the dark symbols that had haunted my nightmares. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing closer, the shadows growing darker, more oppressive. I could feel the darkness reaching out to me, wrapping around me, pulling me in, and then everything went black. When I woke, I was back in my room, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. But the terror wasn't gone. It had followed me back, embedded itself deep within my soul. I could feel it there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. The downward spiral had begun, and there was no way to stop it. The darkness was inside me now, a part of me, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed me completely. The terror had taken root, and there was no escape from the nightmare that my life had become. The darkness had consumed my world, twisting it into a labyrinth of terror where reality and madness danced together in a nightmarish waltz. Every step I took, every breath I drew, was laced with a suffocating dread that threatened to crush me beneath its weight. But beneath that fear, a deeper, more primal instinct drove me forward, a desperate need to unravel the enigma that had entangled my soul. I had become obsessed with finding the truth, convinced that understanding the mystery would somehow free me from the horrors that plagued my every waking moment. Yet, the more I searched for answers, the more elusive they became, slipping through my grasp like smoke in the wind. It started with the books, those cursed ancient volumes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their pages filled with symbols that writhed and shifted before my eyes. I spent hours, days, poring over them, trying to decipher the meaning behind the cryptic texts. But the more I read, the less I understood. The symbols seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking, forming new, incomprehensible patterns that only deepened the mystery. I could feel the knowledge slipping away from me, like a cruel joke played by some malevolent force that reveled in my confusion. The whispers, once distant and indistinct, had grown louder, more coherent. They spoke in riddles, their voices a chorus of the damned, each one dripping with malice and contempt. "You will never understand," they would taunt, their words echoing in the hollow recesses of my mind. "The truth is not for you to know." But I couldn't stop. I was driven by an insatiable hunger to uncover the secrets that had been buried for so long. The voices became my constant companions, guiding me deeper into the darkness, urging me to look where I hadn't dared to before. I began to lose myself in the search, my mind unraveling as I delved further into the abyss. The world outside faded into insignificance, the days blending into nights in a seamless flow of time that no longer held any meaning. My room became a fortress of solitude, the walls closing in around me as I filled the space with notes, symbols, and sketches, frantic attempts to piece together the puzzle that had become my life. But the more I tried to organize my thoughts, the more chaotic they became. The symbols began to appear in my dreams, etched into the flesh of shadowy figures that haunted my sleep, their faces twisted in silent screams. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the symbols still burning behind my eyes, their meaning just out of reach. One night, as I sat hunched over my desk, my eyes bloodshot and my hands trembling, I noticed something strange. A symbol, one that I had seen countless times before, began to shift on the page before me. It twisted and contorted, forming a new pattern that I had never seen. My heart raced as I watched, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. This was it, the key to the enigma, the answer I had been searching for. But as I stared at the new pattern, something dark and terrible bloomed in my mind, a realization that filled me with a horror so profound that I could barely breathe. The symbols were not just patterns. They were a map, a guide to something far more ancient and malevolent than I had ever imagined. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs as I stared at the page in disbelief. These symbols, these twisted, writhing shapes were not meant to be understood by human minds. They were a language of darkness, one that spoke of things that existed beyond the veil of our reality, beings that lurked in the spaces between worlds, waiting for the right moment to break through. As I sat there, the room around me began to shift, the shadows growing darker, more oppressive. I could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that had been watching me all along. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, their voices now a cacophony of sound that threatened to drown out my thoughts. "You've gone too far," they hissed, their words filled with a terrible certainty. There is no going back. I could feel my sanity slipping away, the last vestiges of my mind crumbling under the weight of the knowledge I had uncovered. The symbols on the page seemed to writhe and twist, as if they were alive, their meaning now clear to me in a way that was both terrifying and incomprehensible. I knew then that I had to find the source of this darkness, the heart of the enigma that had consumed my life. It was the only way to end the nightmare, the only way to escape the madness that threatened to swallow me whole. But every step I took brought me closer to the brink. The answers I sought buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. The more I uncovered, the less sense it made, the puzzle pieces fitting together in ways that defied logic, creating a picture that was too terrible to comprehend. The symbols began to appear everywhere, carved into the walls of my room, etched into the wood of my desk, even burned into the flesh of my own skin. I would wake to find them there, staring back at me from the mirror, a constant reminder of the darkness that now lived within me. The whispers no longer came from outside. They were inside my head, their voices mingling with my own thoughts until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. I was no longer sure if the voices were mine or something else, something ancient and malevolent that had taken root in my soul. The final piece of the puzzle came to me in a dream, a vision so vivid that it left me shaking when I woke. I saw a door, hidden deep within the bowels of the university, a door that had been forgotten for centuries. Behind that door lay the heart of the enigma, the source of the darkness that had consumed my life. I knew then that I had to find it, that the only way to end the nightmare was to confront whatever lay behind that door. But as I stood before it, the key trembling in my hand, I realized that the answers I sought would not bring me peace. They would only bring more terror, more madness, more darkness. I unlocked the door, the ancient wood creaking as it swung open, revealing a room shrouded in shadow. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the stench of something long dead but not yet gone. And there, in the center of the room, lay the source of it all, a book, bound in dark, twisted leather, its cover pulsing with a malevolent energy. As I stepped closer, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, their voices merging into one terrible scream that echoed through the depths of my mind. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the book, the cold leather sending a shock of pain through my arm. The symbols on the cover writhed and twisted, their meaning clear to me now, their truth undeniable. And as I opened the book, the darkness surged forward, wrapping around me like a shroud, pulling me into the depths of the enigma. The last thing I heard was the sound of my own voice, mingling with the whispers as I fell into the void, a void from which there was no escape. The enigma had consumed me, and with it, the last remnants of my sanity. The truth had been revealed, and it was more terrible than I could have ever imagined. The door creaked open with an ominous groan, revealing the darkened room beyond. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like the drumbeat of impending doom. The air was thick and suffocating, heavy with the stench of decay and something far more sinister, a presence that I could feel pressing down on me, cold and malevolent. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, their dissonant voices blending into a cacophony of madness that reverberated through my mind. "You wanted the truth," they hissed. "Now face it." I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a resounding thud that felt like the final nail in my coffin. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering candle that cast long, wavering shadows across the walls. In the center of the room, the book lay on a pedestal, its cover a swirling mass of dark, twisted leather, that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The symbols on the cover glowed faintly, their meanings now burned into my mind. A language of darkness that spoke of horrors beyond comprehension. As I approached the book, the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting like serpents, their movements erratic and unsettling. They circled me, closing in tighter with each step I took, until I was surrounded on all sides by a living darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. The air was thick with tension, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional hiss of the shadows as they brushed against my skin, cold and clammy, like the touch of the dead. My hand trembled as I reached for the book, the whispers growing more frantic, their voices merging into one as they urged me to open it. "The truth is within," they chanted, their tone both mocking and reverent. "The truth you've sought for so long." But I hesitated, my mind a whirl of fear and doubt. I knew that whatever lay within those pages would change everything, that once I opened the book, there would be no going back. But the pull was irresistible, a compulsion that had taken root deep within my soul, driving me forward with a force that I could not resist. With a deep breath, I placed my hand on the cover, the cold leather sending a shock of icy pain through my arm. The symbols seemed to writhe beneath my fingers, their meaning shifting and changing even as I tried to comprehend them. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their voices a chorus of despair and madness that echoed in the deepest recesses of my mind. And then, with a single decisive motion, I opened the book. The room exploded into chaos. The shadows surged forward, their forms shifting and coalescing into twisted, nightmarish shapes that filled the room with a palpable sense of terror. The candle flickered wildly, casting erratic patterns of light and shadow across the walls, as if the very room was alive, breathing in time with the darkness that had filled it. And then, from the pages of the book, a dark, roiling mist began to pour forth, swirling around me in a vortex of malevolent energy that made the air crackle with attention. The mist wrapped around me, cold and suffocating, pulling me into its depths with an irresistible force. I could feel it pressing against my skin, seeping into my pores, filling my lungs with its acrid stench. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me as the mist closed in, tightening its grip with every passing second. The whispers became a roar, their voices a deafening torrent of sound that filled my mind with images of unspeakable horror, visions of twisted, deformed beings writhing in agony, their faces contorted in eternal screams of pain and despair. And then the mist parted, revealing a figure standing before me. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shrouded in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood of shadows. Its eyes were nothing more than empty voids, black as the deepest abyss, and as they locked onto mine, I felt a cold, paralyzing fear, unlike anything I had ever known. This was no mere apparition. This was the embodiment of the darkness that had plagued me, the source of the terror that had consumed my life. The figure spoke, its voice a low, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of the void itself. "You have sought the truth," it intoned, each word dripping with malice. "And now you will see it." It raised a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, tipped with sharp, jagged claws that glinted in the dim light. With a slow, deliberate motion, it pointed to the book, the pages now glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. I could feel the darkness pulling at me, urging me to read, to understand the terrible truths that lay within those cursed pages. My hands moved of their own accord, turning the pages one by one, each one revealing a new horror that sent waves of fear crashing through me. The symbols on the pages seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shifting and twisting into forms that defied logic, forms that spoke of things that existed beyond the realms of human understanding, things that had been waiting, lurking in the shadows of reality, waiting for someone like me to uncover their secrets. As I read, the visions in my mind grew more vivid, more real. I could see them now. The beings that had haunted my dreams, their twisted, deformed bodies writhing in the darkness, their faces contorted in eternal screams of pain and despair. I could hear their voices, pleading for release, for an end to their suffering, but I knew that there was no escape, not for them and not for me. The truth was more terrible than I could have ever imagined, a truth that shattered the very foundations of my reality. The figure watched me, its eyes empty and cold, as I reached the final page. The symbols here were different, darker, more malevolent, their meaning clear to me now in a way that filled me with a deep, abiding horror. These were not just words, they were a command that had been written in the language of the void, a language that spoke of the end of all things, of a darkness that would consume the world and everything in it. And then, as I stared at the final symbol, the room around me began to collapse. The walls twisted and warped, the shadows closing in with a force that made the air crackle with tension. The figure stepped forward, its presence overwhelming, as if the very darkness itself had come alive. It reached out, its hand closing around mine, and I felt a cold, piercing pain shoot through my body, a pain so intense that it took my breath away. The book fell from my hands, its pages closing with a resounding thud that echoed through the now silent room. The mist dissipated, the shadows receded, leaving me alone in the darkness with the figure. I could feel its presence pressing down on me, its empty eyes boring into mine, as if it were peering into the very depths of my soul. "You have seen the truth," it whispered, its voice cold and final. "Now you will live it." And with that, the darkness surged forward, wrapping around me like a shroud, pulling me into the void. The last thing I heard was the sound of my own voice, mingling with the whispers, as I fell into the abyss, a void from which there was no escape. The truth had been revealed, and it was more terrible than I could have ever imagined. The darkness that enveloped me was absolute, a void so complete that it devoured all sense of time and space. I felt myself falling, though there was no wind, no sensation of movement, just the infinite crushing blackness that pressed in from all sides, as if the very fabric of reality had been stripped away, leaving nothing but the cold embrace of the void. My thoughts, once clear and sharp, now spiraled into chaos, fragments of memory and fear blending together in a dizzying whirlpool of terror. I had seen the truth, and now that truth was consuming me, tearing apart the last remnants of my sanity. When I finally awoke, it was not into the light, but into a world draped in shadow. The familiar surroundings of my room were gone, replaced by a twisted, nightmarish landscape that defied logic and reason. The walls were no longer solid. They pulsed and writhed as if alive. The dark, organic matter, twisting into grotesque shapes that whispered and moaned in an alien language. The floor beneath my feet felt soft, like flesh, yielding slightly with each step, as if I were walking on the skin of some immense, unseen creature. The air was thick and heavy, laden with the acrid stench of decay and something else, something far more vile, a smell that clung to my lungs and made every breath a struggle. I wandered through this hellish place, my mind reeling, unable to comprehend what had happened. Was this some twisted dream, a final punishment for my hubris? Or had I truly crossed into another realm, a place where the horrors I had uncovered in the book had taken physical form? Every step I took was filled with dread. Every shadow seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, watching me with unseen eyes. I could feel their presence, could sense them, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for the moment when they would strike. The whispers were still with me, though now they had taken on a new tone, no longer just taunting, but pleading. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the twisted halls, their words incomprehensible yet filled with a deep, primal fear. I could hear them crying out in agony, begging for release from the torment that this place inflicted. But as much as their pleas filled me with pity, they also filled me with terror, for I knew that I was not alone in this nightmare. Something else was here, something ancient and terrible, a presence that I could feel watching me, tracking my every move. As I wandered deeper into the maze of shifting shadows, I began to notice that the walls were covered in symbols, those same dark, twisted symbols that had filled the pages of the book. They pulsed with a faint, sickly glow, casting eerie, flickering light across the twisted landscape. The symbols seemed to shift and change as I watched, forming patterns that hinted at a terrible intelligence, something that was using this place to communicate, to draw me deeper into its trap. I tried to escape, to turn back, but the paths I had taken were no longer there. The corridors twisted and turned on themselves, leading me in circles, trapping me in a maze with no end. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the very walls were alive, urging me forward, deeper into the darkness. I could feel the presence growing stronger, its malice seeping into my mind, filling me with an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as if the entire landscape was conspiring against me, pushing me towards something that lay at the heart of this twisted world, a truth so terrible that it could only be found at the center of the labyrinth. Finally, after what felt like hours, or perhaps days, for time had lost all meaning, I came upon a massive doorway, carved from the same pulsing organic material as the rest of the place. The door loomed before me, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and twist as I stared at them. The whispers were louder here, almost deafening, their voices merging into a single, agonized scream that filled my head with unbearable pain. I knew instinctively that whatever lay beyond this door was the source of it all, the heart of the darkness that had consumed my life, the being that had lured me here with promises of truth and power. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, the sound of its hinges creaking like the wails of the damned. Beyond the door lay a vast open chamber, its walls lined with twisted, pulsating forms that resembled both flesh and shadow. In the center of the room stood a figure, tall and shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by a hood of shadow. It turned to face me as I entered, and though I could not see its face, I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, boring into my soul. The figure raised a hand, and the whispers fell silent, the sudden absence of sound leaving a deafening void in its wake. It spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that resonated through the chamber like the rumble of distant thunder. "You have come far," it said, each word dripping with malice. "But the journey is not yet complete. You sought the truth, and now you will face it." With a wave of its hand, the figure gestured to the center of the chamber, where a massive, pulsating mass of darkness lay. The symbols on its surface glowed with an eerie light, shifting and changing as I watched. The sight of it filled me with a deep, abiding terror, for I knew that this was the source of it all, the heart of the enigma, the origin of the darkness that had consumed my life. It was a thing of unimaginable power, a force that had existed long before the dawn of man, a being that had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, biding its time until someone like me would come along and free it from its prison. The figure stepped aside, its hand still outstretched, inviting me to approach. I felt the pull stronger than ever before, a compulsion that drove me forward even as every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to flee this place and never look back. But there was no escape, no way out of the nightmare that had become my reality. I had come too far, uncovered too much, and now the truth was within my grasp. As I approached the mass, the symbols on its surface began to glow brighter, their light almost blinding. The air around me crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality twisting and warping as the power of the being within the mass surged forth. I could feel it in my mind, a presence that filled every corner of my consciousness, overwhelming me with its malice, its hunger, its desire to break free and consume everything in its path. And then, as I reached out to touch the mass, the darkness exploded, the room filled with a blinding light, the symbols flaring with a brilliance that seared my eyes and burned into my mind. The figure before me was consumed by the light, its form dissolving into nothingness as the power of the mass was unleashed. I felt it tear through me, ripping apart my mind, my soul, my very being. until there was nothing left but the darkness. I awoke in my room, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls were solid again, the floor firm beneath my feet. The nightmare was over, yet I knew deep down that it had only just begun. The darkness had followed me back, had taken root deep within my soul, and there was no escaping it. The truth I had uncovered was too terrible to comprehend, too vast to contain within the confines of my mind. It was a darkness that would consume me, that would consume everything, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The whispers had returned, but now they were different. No longer just voices in the dark, but a part of me, a part of the darkness that now lived within me. They spoke of things to come, of the end that was inevitable, of the terror that would spread across the world like a plague, consuming everything in its path. The enigma had been solved, the truth revealed, and now there was nothing left but the void. As I sat there, staring into the darkness, I realized that there was no escape. The abyss had claimed me, had claimed the world, and there was nothing left but the terror that would come for us all. The truth had been revealed, and it was more terrible than I could have ever imagined. The days following my return were a blur of fear and uncertainty. I had escaped the nightmare, or so I thought, but the reality I returned to felt just as unstable, just as treacherous. The darkness I had encountered was gone, but its memory lingered like a shadow over my every thought. Every corner, every shadowed hallway seemed to pulse with a life of its own, filled with the remnants of the terror I had barely survived. The world had become a place of ambiguity, where the lines between what was real and what was imagined were no longer clear. I found myself constantly questioning everything around me. Was the world I saw truly the same one I had left behind? Or was it some twisted reflection, a prison crafted from my own fears and guilt? The people I encountered seemed familiar, but there was always something off about them, something in their eyes that hinted at secrets they were hiding, truths they dared not reveal. Conversations felt stilted, their words dripping with a subtext I couldn't quite grasp. It was as if everyone knew something I didn't, and they were all waiting for the moment when I would figure it out. But the worst part was the silence. The whispers that had once filled my mind were gone, but their absence was almost more terrifying. The quiet was oppressive, a constant reminder of the void that had been left behind. It was as if the darkness had simply receded, lying in wait for the right moment to strike again. Every night, I would lie in bed, straining to hear something, anything, that would confirm my fears. But there was nothing, just the oppressive, suffocating silence. I began to doubt my own memories. Had any of it really happened? The hidden library, the dark figure, the abyss of terror. Were they real, or just the delusions of a mind pushed to its breaking point? The more I tried to remember, the more the details seemed to slip away, like sand through my fingers. I could no longer trust my own mind, could no longer be sure that what I remembered was the truth. It was as if the darkness had left a mark on my soul, a stain that no amount of time could erase. One night, driven by a need for answers, I returned to the place where it had all begun. The university was quiet, its ancient buildings looming like silent sentinels in the moonlight. As I made my way through the deserted corridors, a sense of dread settled over me, a feeling that I was walking into a trap I could not escape. The door to the hidden library was still there, unchanged, as if it had been waiting for me all along. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, half expecting the darkness to surge out and swallow me whole. But when I opened the door, the room was empty. The book, the shadows, the ancient symbols, they were all gone. The room was just that. A room filled with dust and cobwebs, a relic of a past that no longer seemed real. The only thing that remained was the pedestal in the center, now empty and cold. I stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls were bare, the shelves empty. It was as if everything I had seen, everything I had experienced had been wiped away, leaving nothing but an empty shell. But as I stood there, staring at the empty pedestal, I felt something. A presence, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows, deep and dark, stretching out across the room like fingers reaching for something just out of reach. I could feel the darkness watching me, could sense its presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. It was still there, still waiting, still hungry. I left the room, the door closing behind me with a final echoing thud. The university was silent, its halls empty and cold, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I could feel eyes on me, following my every move, tracking me as I made my way back through the twisting corridors. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. When I finally stepped outside, the night air hit me like a wave, cold and sharp. I breathed in deeply, trying to shake the feeling of unease that clung to me like a second skin. But the darkness was still there, still pressing in from all sides. It was as if the world itself had been tainted by the terror I had uncovered, and there was no escaping it. As I walked away from the university, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing there, just the dark, empty streets, silent and still. But I knew deep down that the darkness was still with me, a part of me now, forever entwined with my soul. The whispers were gone, but the terror remained, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and life went on. But the sense of unease never left me. Every shadow seemed deeper, every whisper carried a hidden meaning. The world was no longer a place of light and certainty. It had become a landscape of ambiguity, where the lines between reality and nightmare were forever blurred. I had seen the truth, and it had changed me in ways I could never fully understand. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it. A whisper, soft and distant, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. My heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. The whisper was faint, barely audible, but it was there, unmistakable. I sat up, straining to hear, but the sound was gone. The silence returned, deep and oppressive, pressing down on me like a weight I could not lift.